Good afternoon, everyone from Bloomfield Department of Health. Can everyone hear me? Yes, I see people nodding their head. Thank you. Welcome to this lunch hour special commemorating Sexual Assault Awareness Month. Our discussion today will include national level statistics related to sexual and gender-based violence, as well as resources and tools to promote healing and recovering for people of all backgrounds. My name is Sarah Jacob. I'm a health educator here at Bloomfield Department of Health, and this is a collaborative effort between the Health Department, Family Service League, and Save of Essex County, and She Matters. We have two speakers here today for you, Dr. Wafia Salim and Lauren Phillips. I would like to give you a short introduction on them before getting started. Dr. Wafia Salim is the founder of She Matters, a movement to transition pain into purpose by reframing trauma and connecting one to their life's vision. With 20 years of experience working in child protection and higher education in New Jersey, she's committed to bringing awareness, sharing and advocacy, and supporting resilience. Dr. Salim received her doctorate in social work from the University of Southern California, where she focused on gender-based violence and culture-specific lens to support healing. Our second speaker, Lauren Phillips, serves as the Sexual Violence Hotline Manager for Family Service League and Save of Essex County. With a bachelor's in human services, she has served numerous populations both in New Jersey and her home state in Michigan, but always in the service of helping others, as this is her passion. Lauren believes her Christ-centered faith inspires her to serve and help others regardless of their background, color, race, religion, gender, or other determining factors. I want to welcome and thank these two individuals for taking the time to prepare and deliver this information for us all today. A few logistics before we get started. Please make sure you're muted so we can minimize all background noise. This presentation will take approximately an hour and 15 minutes, and the last 10 to 15 minutes will be reserved for Q&A. At that point, you may unmute and ask your questions or type it out into the chat, and we will make sure it is addressed. This webinar will also be recorded and made available for future viewings as well. Lastly, you are eligible for continuing education credits through this learning session. So at the end of this presentation, we will share a survey link in the chat, as well as email it to you, all our registered participants. Completing the survey will ensure that you will receive the Certified Public Health and CHEST credits for your attendance. Thank you. Okay, Dr. Salim, you can take it away.
Ooh, you have to unmute.
All righty, can you hear me now?
Yes.
I apologize. Good afternoon, everyone, and just welcome to our journey as I invite you to healing. And so just ask that you tune in and embrace this information with an open heart and see how you can support everyone as we journey together. Okay? I'll begin. An invitation to healing, a culturally responsive approach to an inclusive practice.
Mind unlocked, heart unblocked. I am open and willing to receive the lessons, blessings, and manifestations today will present.
I'm open and willing to receive the lessons, blessings, and manifestations today will present.
And so before we begin, I just want to start off with the intention of our journey here today. The intention is that we bring awareness and visibility and center survivors whose stories and voices and experiences are often unheard. Ultimately, this is a call to action to invite all to healing. And so what you see before you is a number 1 billion women will have been affected by gender-based violence, right? According to Violence Against Women and International's perspective. And so to put that, to contextualize that, the planet consists of 7 billion people. And so, and these numbers have come from those that have been reported. And so we know that with gender-based violence, oftentimes there are many factors that goes into account in terms of why someone may not report. Next slide, please. And so just to kind of bring some context around what gender-based violence is. Gender-based violence ultimately is the umbrella, right? It's any form of violence against an individual based on their sex, gender, identity, or expression, and perceived adherence to socially defined expectations. Ultimately, gender-based violence is rooted in gender-related power differences, and it's manifested in domestic violence, sexual violence, child marriages, trafficking, intimate partner violence, and female genital mutilation. For this particular session, we are going to focus on sexual violence. Next slide, please. And so I want to share the United States of America, right? Understanding that 1 billion people globally, 1 billion women globally have been impacted by gender-based violence. We know that that's a grand challenge, right? And so in the United States, in 1994, the United States came up with a federal law, Violence Against Women Act, that was signed by President Bill Clinton. And it was actually authored by then Senator J.R. Biden. That name should sound familiar. He's our current president, right? Through that law, it created support system, a support that was comprehensive and cost effective to support those who had experienced domestic violence, sexual assault, dating violence, and stalking. The VAWA Act is actually renewed every 5 years. And the reason why it's up for renewal every 5 years is to ensure that we are meeting the needs of the survivors. Next slide. And so I want to bring you to now, right? And so right now we're in April, the month of April, where it is considered Sexual Assault Awareness Month, right? And so it's actually, the acronym is SAM. And so we just talked about the laws and how it was created, right, to support and meet the needs of the survivors. But the thing is, the reason why SAM became a big deal is because it's noted that it's impossible to prevent an issue no one knows about, and it's difficult to make people aware of a problem without providing solutions. So SAM is really an opportunity to bring awareness, right? Because we can't heal a thing that we refuse to talk about or we refuse to see. Right? In 2001, the National Sexual Violence Resource Center coordinated the first national SAM campaign. And as you can see, well, not as you can see, but teal was solidified as a color associated with sexual assault awareness. In 2002, violence was actually identified as a global public health issue. And it is that framework that we're using to assess violence and determine prevention, right? Also within that same year, as a result of research, the CDC took steps to treat sexual violence as a preventable issue, right? And so, and it also talks about the prevalence and the socio-ecological model to prevent it. 2020, on the cusp of the pandemic, we had our first ever completely virtual campaign. Next slide. I want to kind of talk about the 20 events that actually shaped sexual violence prevention in the United States, right? And so I'm going to kind of walk you through. So continue to kind of journey with me. And 2001 was our first national SAM campaign, right? 2002, the launch of the World Report on Violence and Health. And that's when, as I explained, that's when we actually acknowledged that violence was a public health issue. 2002, also there was a big highlighted issue around sexual abuse within the Catholic Church, which it became a huge issue in the media. 2006, the Me Too movement, which was founded by Tarana Burke, right? In 2009, the first presidential proclamation to declare April as a Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And then we're going to drop down to 2014. Obviously, there were some things that happened in between, but for sake of time, I'm not going to go over each and every one. 2014, the formation of the White House Task Force to protect students from sexual assault. So as you can see, the United States, this movement has really started to gain some momentum, right? And so 2016, Emily Dole's victim impact statement. So the impact statement was something that was used and it went viral. And so victims are now gaining their voice, reclaiming their voice. And so we saw that in 2016. 2017, women's marches are held worldwide. And at this time, Me Too goes viral. And so that's a huge thing for the sexual violence prevention in the United States, because what happens is it began to pick up, it began to be picked up via social media, and everyone began to talk about it. Even celebrities began to join in this movement and to begin to share their experience and speak out against sexual violence. Next slide, please. Also want to begin to talk about the roots of this movement, right? In the United States, moments for social change and equality kind of got some traction around 1940s and 1950s, around the time of the civil rights era, right? And there was an open discussion about the realities of sexual assault and domestic violence, but that was limited, right? And so activists were equally talking about equal rights and their status quo and all of these things. And so you begin to see efforts that were championed by Black women and women of color. There was one particular advocate, we all are probably, this name probably rings a bell, Rosa Parks, and she was actually known for the bus boycott. But I want to just kind of also inform you that Rosa Parks was an amazing advocate, and she worked at the intersection of race-based and gender-based violence, right? And that framework actually was coined in 1989 by Professor Kimberly Crenshaw, and it's titled Intersectionality. And so one particular case, which is called the rape of Racy Taylor, she was a 24-year-old Black mother and sharecropper, and she was gang raped in 1944 by 6 white boys in Alabama. And this occurred during the Jim Crow South, right? And so the NAACP got wind of it and sent Chief Rape Investigator Rosa Parks, who rallied support and triggered an unprecedented outcry for justice, right? And so this became this wide social activism around sexual assault continued into the 1960s, bringing with it support for survivors and heightened awareness, right? And so in 1971, the first Rape Crisis Center was founded in San Francisco. And so this is the roots of our movement, right? Where it was championed by Black women and women of color. And it's important to note that. Please. Social implications. And so we want to talk about how we arrived with this narrative regarding women of color, right? And so hypersexualized depictions of women of color, particularly Black women, have functioned since the early 1400s and have manifested itself through political and cultural landscape for centuries. It was actually the process of dehumanizing women of color. And so what it did is it made it culturally acceptable to abuse Black women. And so our grand challenge is Black women are invisible, invalidated, and devalued. And we'll talk more about that as we continue. Next slide, please. So Black women and girls experience violence at a disproportionate rate while facing unique, persistent cultural barriers preventing healing. Next slide. And so I began to share some of these statistics, right? Because what we said earlier, right? Awareness is key, because you can't prevent a thing if you're unaware about it, if you're unaware of it, right? So 1 in 4 Black girls will be sexually abused before the age of 18. Next slide. Among students, 11% of Black girls in a national high school sample reported having been raped. Next slide. According to the US Department of Justice, 1 in 5 Black women are survivors of rape. Right? Next slide, please. For every Black woman who reports rape, at least 15 Black women do not report. And so I want to talk about what are some of the reasons as to why Black women may necessarily not report. And it has a lot to do with the impact of the history of trauma regarding racism and oppression, right? And so there's this unique history of racist and sexist victimization that Black women experience that actually impedes Black women from reporting. Next slide. 40%, that's a huge number. But it's important for us to know that 40% of confirmed sex trafficking survivors in the United States are Black. And so oftentimes, excuse me, when we look at the media and we look at the images that's actually surrounding around sex trafficking or human trafficking, quite often it's not Black women or Black girls or Black people in general, right? However, so you need to know that 40% of confirmed sex trafficking survivors in the United States of America are Black. That awareness is critical. I'm going to ask you to listen.
That man over there says that women need to be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches and given the best place wherever. Nobody helps me into carriages, nor over the muddy patches, but gives me any best place. And ain't I a woman?
And so that was a speech given by Sojourner Truth in 1851, right? And she was an abolitionist who stood for women's rights as well. And so the Black women have been presenting a call to action to see us. Ain't I a woman? Next slide. Why don't we turn back to VAWA, Violence Against Women Act, right? And so we talked about it needing to be reauthorized or up for reauthorization every 5 years. And so I want to talk about the year of 2022, where there was some groundbreaking provisions to strengthen this law, right? And so this law began to talk about economic justice, access for survivors of all genders by strengthening non-discrimination laws, creating services specifically for the LGBTQIA community, right? It also restores tribal jurisdiction. This reauthorization really speaks to accountability, right? It's talking about existing housing protection, increasing access to emergency and short-term housing. And I really wanted us to pay close attention to the last sentence where it talks about investment in culturally specific service providers to ensure survivors of color are supported. And so I want to just bring special attention to the law recognizes that it is critical that culturally specific service providers are utilized to support marginalized communities, those communities that have been invisible, invalidated, and ultimately not invited to experience healing. Next slide. And so just want to provide us with some numbers, right? And so according to the US Census 2020 and Women of Color Network and AAPI data, these are the numbers regarding population as it's broken down between race of women in particular, and talking about rape and intimate partner violence. So as you can see, there is disparities amongst the different races as it relates to white, Hispanic, Black, Native Americans, and Asian. Right. And so you can look at the actual amount of people in terms of population, and then look at the percentages of assaults as it relates to rape and intimate partner violence. And they're astronomical, right? And so African-American women or Black women aren't necessarily the highest to experience assault, but they're up there in comparison to the population being at 13.9%. Native Americans, their population is 1.3%, and you can see that the prevalence is 34.1% regarding rape and 37.5% regarding IPV. This must stop. Next slide. And so National Sexual Violence Resource Center created a theme that made sense, that actually aligned with the reauthorization for 2022. And this year's theme is Drawing Connections, Prevention Demands Equity. Next slide. And I say, wellness is a birthright, not a privilege. And what do we mean by privilege? Privilege is an unearned access or advantage granted to specific groups or people because of their membership in a social group. And so wellness is a birthright, meaning that we all get to have access to healing now. It gets to be accessible for our people, particularly those that are marginalized, because we see the prevalence of harm is so incredibly high. Next slide. Want to talk about prevention and what actually works, right? And so when we talk about gender-based violence, it's important that when we're looking at the prevention aspect, it's important that we include men and women in this conversation. We engage the entire community. We combine multiple approaches. So oftentimes we've been talking about trauma, or people talk about trauma-informed lens, and that's a great starting point. And once we are able to identify and name trauma, it's important to understand, how do we now move that trauma? How do we transmute that trauma? And so it takes multiple approaches to do so. And so one of the approaches that we're going to talk about today is healing-centered engagement. And we'll get to that at another slide. And the next prevention method is last at least 6 months. And so as we can see in this journey, we know that there has been historical trauma that has started in the 1400s, right? And so we know any approach, any method that we use, it's going to take some time, it's going to take some commitment. So you're not going to be able to, there's no one set approach to ending gender-based violence. It is so massive that it needs time, it needs commitment, and it needs all of us to address this public health issue. And also addressing social norms around the acceptability of violence. What do we mean by that? One in particular is toxic masculinity. And so this will be an opportunity to really engage our youth around, what does that actually mean, toxic masculinity, right? And so I'll give you an example. When we think about oftentimes when children are young, right? And so I'm just going to use the example of a young boy and a young girl. And a young girl can complain about or share that, oh, he keeps hitting me. This young man keeps hitting me. And we'll turn to the young girl and say, that's because he likes you. Right. And so we begin this normalization that hitting, and although playful, we begin this normalization that hitting and harm is associated with love. It's how boys and girls relate. And so that's something that we get to disrupt, because we know that there's a connection as it relates to gender-based violence. Right. And when we talk about response, we get to target survivors, encourage women's autonomy and empowerment, and include psychosocial elements such as counseling and victim advocacy. These are the things that research has shown works, right? And so we get to do what works. Next slide. And so to align with VAWA reauthorization 2022 for 2022, we understand that culture-specific services are critical as we engage marginalized communities. And so I want to talk about this one in particular framework, which is healing-centered engagement, that was created by Dr. Sean Ginwright, right? And it helps us with understanding, going beyond trauma, right? And asking questions beyond what happened to you. So in the trauma-informed method or framework, the question is, what happened to you? And that's important to know, right? It's important to know what happened to you. It's important to name trauma. It's important to give it a voice, to understand its impact. And it is also important to know that the person that it has impacted. And so it's also important to go beyond what happened to you to asking the question, what is right with you, right? And this view allows agents, those who have experienced trauma, to have some autonomy of who they get to be around their well-being, right? They get to create their own wellness, right? And they get to redefine what that traumatic event, how it will lead in their life, right? And so it also provides an explicitly political lens rather than clinical, right? And so it doesn't necessarily jump to the clinical as the only modality for healing and wellness. It incorporates culturally responsive approaches, and we'll talk more about that. It also provides the opportunity to be culturally grounded and view healing as the restoration of identity. What does that mean, right? It means as a person who has experienced trauma, get to look at that experience and say that I'm not going to be led by the experience, but I'm going to be led by who I say I am, declaring that you are powerful. That's a way to restore your identity, right? It's also looking to be strength-driven, right? Focusing on what you want rather than suppressing what has happened to you. And in this framework, it also gives an opportunity for adults and youth to activate their healing, right? It builds empathy. It encourages youth and adults to dream and imagine beyond what they have experienced. And lastly, it provides the opportunity to critically reflect and take loving action. Next slide. And so these are some culturally responsive pathways that we can engage to access healing. And one of the things I want us all to take away from here is that healing is rooted in worthiness, and it must be accessible now. And so when we begin to think about clinical methodology, many times it doesn't give access to marginalized communities, because then you have the issues around uh, funding. You have the issue around actually getting to the location. And so when we're thinking about culturally responsive pathways, we're thinking about people having access right now. And so, and how you're able to have access to healing is believing that you're worthy of it, right? That you are worthy of being whole. You are worthy of transitioning your pain into purpose, right? And so we do that through storytelling. Storytelling is an opportunity to actually tell your truth. Oftentimes, those that have been victimized, they hold that experience in their body, and there's a lot of shame around sexual abuse. And so the opportunity to tell your story, to stand in your truth, that is healing, right? And we saw that in some of the events that happened around the sexual violence prevention, where the young lady had an impact statement, right? And so that was a healing opportunity. Self-determination, being able to determine who you are, and not looking at who you are through the lens of trauma, but who you say you are, as opposed to a whole person, not fragmented as a result of your experience. Community. We know that those who have experienced violence oftentimes are isolated. And so to counteract that, community is a great way to access healing. Healing circles where you get peer-to-peer to support, you're able to reflect and access healing tools. Wellness tools rather. Music, listening to music. In this particular session, I started us off with some music. It's kind of like inviting us to a space of relaxation, of healing, right? It incites us. It incites us to and connects us to the intention that we have. Meditations and breath work, it gives you opportunity to stand in the now, right? Art is a way of expression. Rest is another pathway to healing, right? Play, it gives us access to imagination, to go beyond the traumatic experience and actually imagine what it would be like beyond the assaults. Like, who am I beyond that? I am powerful. Play gives you an opportunity to tap into resilience, right? Nutrition is also a pathway to healing. Liberation, we know that as we saw in this presentation, that for marginalized communities, there's also oppression. And so we know that when we're talking about marginalized communities having access to healing, we know that it's important also to speak up and disrupt and talk about those systems of oppression. And so that for marginalized communities, healing and liberation, they are interconnected. And lastly, equity is a pathway to healing. We know that with marginalized communities, that it's important to think about how we can make this thing, how we can make healing equitable. And we do that by storytelling. We do that by self-determination. We do that by healing circles, by way of healing circles and spirituality. I'm sorry, I skipped over that one. Spirituality is a critical pathway to healing. Oftentimes people use prayer as a way to connect to a higher power, right? And that's their way of healing. Now, are we talking about these pathways to healing to operate in silos? No, these pathways to healing can actually operate in tandem, right? They operate with each other, right? And they can also operate with the clinical methodology as well. It's just saying that these particular pathways to healing, they become culturally responsive. It's not based on privilege, but it's based simply on knowing your worth and that you're worthy of healing beyond what has happened to you. Next slide. And so I'd like to conclude with this quote by Audre Lorde, stating, "Caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare." And so it's important that when we're talking about marginalized communities, it's important that we recognize from the numbers that we have seen that there's an endangerment that is happening. And so it is critical to give them an opportunity, to give us, as I'm included as well, to give us an opportunity to practice self-preservation. And that happens through identifying culturally responsive wellness tools that give people access to being visible, that validates their experiences, right? And provide them an opportunity to see themselves as whole. And so I'm going to leave us with, next slide, please. And this is some cultural specific resources that you all can actually take a look at and see. This is throughout the state of New Jersey that will support different cultures and giving them access to healing now.
Know exactly what you're thinking. Thoughts million. I can see the question that's behind your eyes. You're searching for your peace of mind. Listen up to this truth. You are me and I and you. Every one of us is worthy. Baby, girl, worthy woman. Every one of us is worthy. Know your life, I felt your pain. I know your joys and your shame. Sometimes it feels like life walks over you, like you're titty on the ground. But either on the ground or in your purse, the smallest piece still holds its worth. Every one of us is worthy. Baby.
And so I want to thank you all for journeying with me as we talk about an invitation to healing. And so I want to conclude with us knowing that every one of us is worthy, right? And that healing is rooted in worthiness, not a privilege. Thank you so much. And you can use my barcode or my QR code as a way to maintain contact with me. Thank you. And I'd love to stay in touch and see how I can support you and your agency and even your community in terms of using a culturally responsive approach to healing. Okay, thank you so much. And I know our next presenter is going to talk more about the resources in Essex County.
Thank you, Dr. Salim.
Thank you.
Please give Vanessa the time to share our second speaker's slides.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Salim, for that beautiful presentation. My name is Lauren Phillips, and I am the Sexual Violence Hotline Manager for Family Service League / SAVE of Essex County. And before we get started, I do want to acknowledge that today is Denim Day, and Denim Day is the last Wednesday in April. And we wear denim to bring awareness to sexual assault and also victim blaming. And this was started in 1998 when an Italian court overturned the sentence of a rapist who raped his driving student in 1992. And the sentence was overturned because they stated that because of the young lady, her jeans were so tight that she must have assisted in her rape. And so Denim Day started after that, like I said, to bring awareness to sexual assault and also victim blaming. And that's what this pen is for. I don't know if y'all can see it, but it says, well, why do we wear denim? And you can go to the next slide. So a few statistics. I'm gonna skip over a few in the interest of time. But women ages 18 to 24 who are college students are 3 times more likely than women in general to experience sexual violence. Females of the same age who are not enrolled in college are 4 times more likely. More than 1 in 5 non-Hispanic Black women in the United States were raped in their lifetime. More than 4 in 5 American Indian and Alaska Native women have experienced violence in their lifetime. 1 in 3 Hispanic women reported unwanted sexual contact in their lifetime. 32.9% of adults with intellectual disabilities have experienced sexual violence, and 47% of all transgender people have been sexually assaulted at some point in their lives. And that is just to bring numbers into the picture when we talk about needing equity. And you go to the next slide. So Family Service League, who are we? We are a counseling agency that focuses on individual, family, and group therapy. We believe that safe emotional intimacy is the bedrock of an enriching and gratifying life. We believe that a loving, nurturing, and resilient family is built upon both mutually gratifying adult relationships and enriching parent-child relationships. And a few of the services that we offer at Family Service League are individual counseling, group programs, or group, support groups which focus on sexual assault survivors, grief support for individuals and families coping with chronic illnesses, addictions, and families with eating disorders. The fees are determined on a sliding scale based on income and household size. And one of the programs and services we offer underneath Family Service League is SAVE of Essex County, which is the next slide. And we are the state designated sexual violence program for Essex County underneath FSL. We are also a part of the Essex County SART response team, which consists of forensic nurse examiners, law enforcement, and also confidential sexual violence advocates. And our team has two goals, which are to provide direct services to survivors of sexual violence and their families, and to work to prevent sexual violence through education and advocacy. And some of the ways we prevent these things or bring awareness, we offer a 24-hour toll-free confidential hotline. And that is the hotline that I'm the manager on. So even if you call now, I'll answer, maybe. We also offer counseling, which is free and unlimited to survivors of sexual assault. And we also offer forensic examination, law enforcement, and legal accompaniment. So we accompany survivors when they get the rape kits done. We also accompany them to police stations to make police reports and also court proceedings if needed. And also we've been to gynecological visits and things like that. So we are advocating in every way that we can for survivors of sexual assault. And we also do prevention education. So this is all throughout Essex County. We go into the schools, we go into businesses, and we offer like presentations on sexual violence 101, cyberbullying, and different topics like that to bring awareness. And you can go to the next slide. And these are just some statistics from the organization. So Family Service League in 2022, we provided 5,493 counseling sessions for individuals, couples, and families, 3,084 virtual counseling sessions, 2,605 counseling sessions for survivors and their significant others. And we serviced a total of 380 clients. 196 survivors of sexual violence received counseling, and we had 463 new requests for service taken. And you can go to the next slide. And like I said, underneath FSL is SAVE, which is us, where we specifically, target sexual violence. And so this sexual violence program in 2022, we had 822 hotline calls, 9 Spanish hotline calls, 82 in-person accompaniments. And these are, like we said, we go to the hospitals, police stations, court, and things of that nature. We did that 82 times. We had 4 virtual accompaniments, 362 Uber rides called for circumstances involving sexual violence. So we do also offer free Uber rides to and from counseling or to police stations or hospitals if it has something to do with sexual violence. 16 people we had interested in becoming a confidential sexual violence advocate. And we had 9 outreach events at the college, 12 college presentations, 38 community outreach events, 9 bilingual community events, 13 media literacy presentations, and 15 K through 12 presentations. And you can go to the next one. And so this is our information, and it just says if you know someone or if you personally have been sexually assaulted, this hotline, like I said, is 24 hours. And we give information if you're not sure about something. If you call for Essex County, if you call, we'll give you the information. Even outside of Essex County, we can refer you to the county that you should call. We always tell people if they were sexually assaulted to try not to bathe, shower, douche, brush their teeth, gargle, change clothes, urinate, eat, drink, or smoke. And this is simply to preserve evidence. And so we are available and we're here for the community. Like I said, even if it's outside of Essex County, we can refer you to your designated county or program. And so we're just here for sexual assault survivors to try to end this epidemic, whatever you want to call it, pandemic, I don't know, it needs to end though. So we're here for those reasons. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Salim and Lauren, for bringing this valuable information to our community. At this time, I want to open the floor to our participants. Any questions you have, you can unmute and ask, or you can put it in the chat and we will field them one by one. I believe there was one question if the resources will be shared. So if the presenters have no objections, then I am willing to send out the PowerPoints to the registered participants. Do you want to field some of the questions?
Okay, so if there are no questions in the chat currently, I have some questions that we have written out just to go over some things. So this question's for Dr. Salim. The question is, how do you find the balance between educating the next generation of young girls to be who they want to be and wear what they want, yet also making sure young men should also be educated on respect and self-control of their own behavior? This question kind of stems from that idea that women can be very hypersexualized in the media. But we're definitely in an era of time now where young women or people in their young 20s, 30s are more confident in being able to wear whatever they want. You'll come into a girl and you'll say, oh, that's very revealing. And she'll say, well, I can wear whatever I want. And people will still tend to tell girls to watch what they wear, or they were asking for it depending on the clothes that they are wearing. So while we're teaching girls to be confident and be who they want, how do we find that balance?
Thank you, Vanessa. That is a loaded question, right? There was two questions actually. So I believe that what's happening is we're making a correlation between what you wear and assault. And so that's the myth that we get to dispel, right? And so what you wear has nothing to do with assault. Assault is about power and control, right? Mm-hmm. And so when we begin to dismantling or breaking down or disrupting violence, we get to the core. What is the root of it? And so the root of it is power and control. And so that's how we address assault and violence. Now, as it relates to what we wear, and so there is a hypersexuality that is present, right, amongst women and young girls and how we dress. Even if you go shopping, you'll see, I had an example of when I went shopping, I have a godchild, and when she was younger, I would buy gifts for Valentine's or, different holidays, and I would buy her pajamas and undergarments. And I noticed that in my purchasing of her undergarments, there were, typically when you think of little girls, you don't think of bikinis, right? You don't think of bikinis that a young girl would wear. You kind of think of briefs and so forth. So I was actually shocked that there was some bikini style underwear for a 5-year-old. And so that's the hypersexualization that we're talking about. But so it's two part where we do get to have autonomy over our bodies and what we wear, and we don't get to be objectified, right? We are people, we're human. And so we're whole people, we're coming with our emotions, our ideas, all that we bring, right? And so we get to be respected for that. And we also get to offer our young girls more than one ways of being expressed, right? Being sexual is one expression. It's one means of expression. We can also tap into their intellect. We can tap into the being creative, right? And so we get to really stop this lens, this fragmented lens of either sexualized or not sexualized, as opposed to embracing all of our narration, which can include intelligence, it can include creativity, it can also be in sensuality, which is a form of expression as well. And so I think when we're talking about how do we express ourselves through clothing, we get to be in these critical conversations. What's behind the way you want to dress? What type are you ready for the attention that could potentially come? Not that the attention is right or wrong, but what the reality is and what it will bring, right? And so these are some of the conversations we get to be in. So I don't necessarily say right or wrong or there's a concrete answer, but I really think it's a great conversation to be with our young people in terms of what's driving them to be who they are, how they express themselves. And so I think there's two different conversations of how we express ourselves and the correlation between dress and violence. Did I answer that? I know I felt a lot.
No, that was a great answer. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I want to side note agree that I just feel like expression is very important to young people nowadays, and to tell them that they can't or cannot, or that they can't express that they want the way they want to is unfair, simply because of how other people will judge them. But the point that you bring about preparing them for the attention that may or may not come is very important. I know a lot of people like to just sidebar it. They say, well, I'm going to wear what I want. I don't care what anyone thinks. Yes, you can do that. I totally agree. But at the same time, you have to be very much aware that a lot of other people will not treat you with the respect that you deserve. So go ahead, Lauren.
Okay, and I just wanted to piggyback on what I wholeheartedly agree with Dr. Salim about, but we also, as part of our SAVE program, we do outreach to the schools, and we specifically talk about consent and what consent is. And we make sure we bring attention and talk specifically to the young men and let them know about what consent is, what it is not. And we like to tell them, like, ignorance is no excuse to commit a crime. And so just because you don't know does not mean that you won't be held accountable for your actions. And so we do also offer those presentations for consent, like I said, specifically to the young men and women, but young men as well, because when we talk about sexual assault, most of the time it's always directed to the women, like prevention for the women. But what about prevention for the men, and making sure you know that no means no, and that it has to be enthusiastic, and, like I said, talking about consent.
That's a great point.
Yeah, thank you both. This next question is for Lauren. So other than Spanish and English, are there any other languages that FSL serves, or any other specific cultures that you find barriers with in terms of counseling or hotline calls?
So as far as the hotline, we just have Spanish and English, but we do have therapists and clinicians in the office that speak Creole. And so we do offer that as well with counseling. But I think at one point they offered Mandarin. Don't quote me on that, but I do believe that at some point they offered that as well.
Okay. One more question. A lot of the people that may or may not come through Family Service League may be people who don't necessarily have the type of income to provide childcare while they're at counseling services. So are there childcare services that can be used while people seek care at Family Service League, or places that you can refer them to so that they can get counseling efficiently and their kids can also be cared for.
So I'm gonna have to refer to my supervisor who's here, Leontine. I do not believe we have childcare services at this time. But as far as being able to afford it, it's on a sliding scale based on household size and income. And for survivors of sexual assault, it is free and it's unlimited. But yeah, she just said we don't have childcare services at the time.
Thank
And
you.
I did see a question in the chat about Union and Morris County, and I do have that information for Anna Maria. For Union County, the Victims Witness Advocacy Program, I can put the phone number in the chat, but it's 855-271-2376. I'll put it in the chat. And for Morris County, they have the Sexual Assault Center, and they also have a 24-hour hotline, and they offer, but the website offers the same services that we do, and they have a 24-hour hotline as well. And so I'll type that in the chat.
Perfect. Okay.
Any other questions from the audience? Again, I just want to thank our presenters for taking the time and effort to put together these presentations for us. There were a couple of meetings prior to this that we got together, so setting aside time from your work schedule for that, thank you. We appreciate the work that you do and the service that you provide for us.
Okay. I'm also going to put the evaluation survey into the chat just to make sure you fill out the survey to get any type of continuing education credits if you want them.
And can I do a plug as well?
Yes, of course.
I wanted to talk about She Matters, which is a culturally responsive approach to addressing gender-based violence. I will say that we do center Black women and Black girls because, as I shared in the presentation, we look at those numbers and they're astronomical in comparison to the actual total amount of Black women and girls in the United States. And so my offering to as a call to action is I work with different agencies and provide trainings, whether it be for an educator, a social worker, a practitioner, to not just support the survivors, but to also support all survivors. And that can include your support team, right? So oftentimes when we're thinking about the work and who is attracted to this work, you often come into this work via your own personal lens. And so it's important that there's concurrent healing that's happening, that you're engaging your own individual healing as well as supporting the community at large. And so I created a professional development series called We Are the Work that can support different agencies. I also provide healing circles for adults and youth. As a way to get peer-to-peer support, to access self-reflection, and to access some wellness tools. Because as you know, our marginalized communities, the clinical space is not a run to. We don't necessarily run to the clinical space, although it's needed and it's an awesome modality, but that's not our first step. And healing circles are oftentimes is a gateway to getting therapy because you recognize as you're speaking with your peers or other people that you need additional support. And so that's a way to actually access that support and to be padded with clinical support. So on my slide, I put up my QR code where you can contact me and I can potentially meet with you and we can talk about your strengths and needs for your particular agency and I can figure out how I can support you best.
Thank you, Dr. Salim. And so that completes our webinar today.
Yay.
Don't forget to take our number if you all have anybody who needs services or you think anybody needs services.
Okay, and Dr. Salim and Lauren, you're okay with me sharing the PowerPoints, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And remember that healing is rooted in worthiness, not privilege. And so everyone gets to have access to healing now.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Please don't forget to fill out the survey, but we will also be sending it through email as well if you do not get the link now. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.
Yeah,
Thank
bye-bye.
you. Happy Wednesday. Bye-bye.
Bye.